At 7:30 on Friday evening, a popular product pricing key expired from the cache. Nothing else had failed. The cache cluster was healthy, the database was healthy, and checkout traffic was exactly where the capacity plan expected it to be. 3 minutes later, customers could add products to their carts but could not pay. Database connections were exhausted, API instances were timing out, and the autoscaler was enthusiastically adding more workers to the queue. That last part was less helpful than it sounds. Every new worker asked the same database for the same missing value. One expired key had turned normal demand into a synchronized rush. This is a cache stampede, and it can make a healthy backend attack itself. In this SystemSignal breakdown, we will follow the incident from the first cache miss to complete checkout failure. Then we will rebuild the read path using request coalescing, stale data, randomized expiration, bounded concurrency, and recovery controls. The important lesson is not simply to add a cache. It is to design what happens at the exact moment the cache has nothing to give you. Imagine a railway booking hall with several entrance gates, but only one reservation counter. While the counter is closed, passengers gather outside. The moment it reopens, every gate releases its crowd at once. The clerk is technically available, but availability is not the same as infinite capacity. A cache stampede behaves the same way. The expired key is the closed counter. Application instances are the gates. The database is the single clerk receiving thousands of identical questions. Opening more application gates does not help. It simply delivers the crowd faster. In distributed systems, adding workers during synchronized demand can be like solving a traffic jam by adding more cars. Under normal conditions, checkout asks the cache for the current price and receives it in a few milliseconds. Only the first request after a genuine miss queries the pricing database. That result is stored with a time to live, and later requests reuse it. This removes repeated work from the database and keeps checkout fast. But this diagram hides an important assumption. Requests arrive at different times. If a popular key expires while thousands of checkouts are active, every application instance observes the same miss. Without coordination, each instance believes it is the one responsible for rebuilding the value. The read path has no owner, so everyone volunteers. Distributed systems are wonderfully generous with other people's database connections. A normal cache miss is a small maintenance event. One request pays the cost of loading the value, the cache is refreshed, and everyone else benefits. A stampede begins when many requests miss together. They create duplicate database queries for identical information. Query latency rises, so requests remain active longer. Active requests occupy connection pools and worker threads. Queues grow, timeouts trigger retries, and autoscaling adds more callers. Even after one query finally refreshes the cache, the database may still be processing the duplicate backlog. The difference is coordination. Demand did not suddenly become larger in business terms. The system multiplied the work required to serve the same customers. Here is the feedback loop. Normal checkout traffic reaches many API instances. They all discover the same expired key and start duplicate loads. The connection pool fills, database latency increases, and callers time out. Some callers retry, while queued requests continue arriving. The database now spends capacity answering repeated questions instead of completing useful orders. Slow responses keep more requests in memory, which increases concurrency again. The cache cannot recover because the request that should refresh it is competing with thousands of copies of itself. This is why cache stampedes are dangerous. Failure produces the exact load that prevents recovery. If your recovery plan begins with every instance trying harder at once, you do not have a recovery plan. You have synchronized optimism. The operations dashboard initially blamed the database because query latency and connection usage were high. The cache hit rate looked acceptable at 96%, and that number delayed the investigation. 4% misses across millions of requests can still be enormous, and averages conceal hot keys. Engineers then noticed one pricing key producing most of the load. Database query attempts were rising, while completed checkouts were falling. Auto-scaling had made the ratio worse by adding more independent cache loaders. The useful metric was not only cache hit rate, it was concurrent loads per key, duplicate queries per logical operation, waiters per refresh, and stale responses served. Once the team grouped work by cache key, the outage stopped looking like mysterious database trouble and started looking like an ownership problem. The primary fix is request coalescing, often called single flight. When a request misses the cache, it tries to claim temporary ownership of that key. One request becomes the loader and queries the database. Requests arriving behind it do not start new loads. They wait for the same result, receive a safe stale value, or fail quickly according to policy. When the loader succeeds, it refreshes the cache and shares the value with all waiters. The lock is scoped to the cache key, not the complete service, so unrelated products continue normally. The ownership record needs a short timeout because loaders can crash. It also needs bounded waiters. Single flight converts 10,000 identical database queries into one query and 10,000 coordinated consumers. Single flight controls duplicate loading after a miss, but a resilient cache also prevents synchronized misses. Add random jitter to expiration times so related keys do not disappear together. When business rules allow it, use stale-while-revalidate. Serve the previous value for a short safety window while one owner refreshes in the background. Warm only the keys whose traffic justifies it. Warming everything is an expensive way to move the Stampede to deployment time. Cache legitimate not found results briefly so repeated invalid requests do not reach the database. Limit refresh concurrency. Enforce deadlines and shed excess work before queues consume all memory. These layers serve different purposes. Jitter spreads events, stale data preserves availability, single flight removes duplicate work, and load shedding protects the remaining capacity. The fragile design treats the cache like a dictionary. If the value is missing, fetch it. That logic is correct for one request and dangerous for a fleet. The resilient design treats cache population as shared work. One owner loads each key. Fixed expirations receive jitter, safe stale values preserve service, and waiting consumes a strict budget. This introduces trade-offs. Stale data is unacceptable for some values, such as authorization decisions or final payment amounts. Distributed locks add failure modes and must expire safely. Hotkey replication can improve reads but complicate invalidation. The correct design begins with business tolerance. How stale may this value be? How expensive is regeneration? And what should customers see when fresh data is temporarily unavailable? During recovery, the team enabled stale pricing for eligible catalog values, reduced refresh concurrency, and stopped retries from creating new database work. They restored live loading through a small canary before releasing all waiting requests. The permanent dashboard now tracks cache hit rate beside more useful signals. Loads per key, coalesced waiters, refresh duration, stale age, lock contention, regeneration errors, and database queries per logical lookup. Alerts identify hot keys before overall hit rate changes significantly. The team also records why a value is served. Fresh cache hit, stale response, loader result, or fallback. That makes degraded behavior visible instead of accidental. Recovery succeeds when traffic returns at the rate the dependency can accept, not at the rate the backlog can produce. The checkout outage began with one ordinary cache expiration. It became a stampede because thousands of requests were allowed to rebuild the same value independently. Remember the design principle. One missing key should create one controlled refresh, not synchronized demand. Use single flight ownership to coalesce work. Add jitter so related keys do not expire together. Serve stale data when the business can tolerate it. Warm truly critical keys, cache legitimate negative results, bound refresh concurrency, and shed excess, load before the database loses room to recover. Measure loads and waiters per key, not only average hit rate. In a system design interview, explain the failure mode before naming the tools. Synchronized misses create duplicate work increases latency, and latency increases concurrency. Then show how ownership, spreading, and bounded degradation break that loop. The cache is not merely a faster place to store data. It is a shared control system at the busiest point in your read path. If you enjoy clear explanations of complex engineering problems and important developments in technology, subscribe to SystemSignal. We publish a new visual breakdown every week.